He took the job because no one else wanted it, and because silence felt safer than people. Cal lived the kind of life that made a person choose long roads and empty rooms. A small ferry carried him across black water that shrugged in the winter wind, then left him on the far side of the bay with a crate of dry food, a duffel, and the keys to a house that most of the town pretended not to see. Graywater Shore wasn't a beach. It was a strip of stone and marsh, where fog moved like a living thing, and the tide chewed at the edges of the land. The house stood by itself at the end of a crumbling lane, 2 stories, pitched roof, windows like old eyes that had seen too much weather. It was the last habitable building on the peninsula. Beyond it were only broken pilings and the iron bones of a long-dead pier. 2 weeks, the harbor master had said, passing the keys through the ticket window. Watch the tide gauge and the beacon. Keep the generator running. Log the weather every 6 hours. If something breaks and you can't fix it, write it down. The storm season is coming. We just need someone present. Cal asked what present meant. Lights on, the harbor master said, so the fishermen don't forget they're not alone out there. The harbor master didn't mention the stories. Cal had heard them anyway, about the last caretaker who left in the middle of the night and wouldn't say why, about voices in the radio check that came from no boat anyone knew, about the way the house had a habit of remembering things you hadn't done yet. Cal didn't believe in haunted houses. He believed in bad wiring, weak coffee, and men who avoided eye contact. He believed in work he could list: clean gutters, bleed the radiators, test the generator, wind the beacon lens, write numbers in a book. He liked work that had edges. He shouldered the duffel and walked toward the house. The fog pushed back, slow and patient, as if curious. Gulls rode the wind and called in a language that sounded like laughter. The door was old oak that had been painted too many times. The handle turned with a sticky sigh. Inside smelled like salt, dust, and something faintly metallic, like wet coins left to dry. The front room held a table, a stove, shelves with labeled bins, fuses, rope, lamp oil, patches. A spiral stair climbed to the beacon above. In the corner, a shortwave radio sat on a small desk with a microphone and a faded card of emergency codes pinned to the wall. A round clock ticked too loudly. He found the logbook under the radio. The last entry was 2 days old in a tight hand. Barometer 1001 millibar. Wind east-northeast 18 knots. Cloud base low and variable. Night fog heavier than forecast. Heard bell buoy, though no buoy is installed. Possibly chain noise. Cal raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. There were stranger sounds at sea than anyone could explain. He started the generator, checked the fuel tank, and walked the perimeter with a flashlight as the light fell. The bay took color out of everything. Even the beacon lamp looked pale as it pulsed. He found the tide gauge behind the shed, a metal rod with numbers and a sliding float. It bumped gently, marking the water's rise. He made dinner from a can, and bread that tasted like dust. He set an alarm for midnight to log the weather, then lay on the narrow cot and listened to the house settle. Wood whispering, the stove's occasional click, the tick of that too loud clock. At 11:57 p.m., he woke without the alarm. He couldn't name what had woken him. A dream he couldn't catch, a change in pressure, a thought that arrived with someone else's breath. He climbed to the radio desk and flipped to channel 16, the hailing frequency. Static murmured like a storm gathering coin by coin. Graywater Beacon, station check, he said out of habit. He waited. then logged the barometer, wind, and cloud. He didn't expect an answer, and at first he thought he hadn't gotten one. Then the speaker gave a faint sound, like a voice talking down a long hallway. "Water. On." He leaned closer. "Say again?" "Hey, Water. You there?" The voice was quiet but clear now, as if the volume had just found him. "This is Graywater Beacon," Cal said. "Identify." Silence. Then, "Lights late." A click. Quiet. Cal listened a full minute, then two. He thought about picking up the mic again, and decided not to. He wrote in the logbook, "Unidentified transmission at 004. Male voice. Statement. Lights late." He added a note to check the timing on the beacon rotation. He stepped out onto the small balcony, under the lamp, and looked at the bay. The fog had thickened into sheets, drawn into slow shapes by a wind he couldn't feel on his face. The lamp pulsed on its clockwork, one long flash every 12 seconds. He timed 3 cycles. They were exact. Below, the bell buoy that wasn't there rang, faint and far. He went back inside. The clock read 12:17. The logbook read 12:15. He shook his head. 2 minutes wasn't much in an old house, and went to bed. By the third day, the house had taught him its noises, so the new ones stood out. Mid-morning, with gulls calling and a gray sun trying to matter, Cal heard footsteps on the back stair. Not the metal spiral up to the beacon. These were wooden, slow, deliberate. 5 steps. A pause. 3 more. Then nothing. He went to the back hall. A closed door waited there. Paint bubbled from salt and heat. He tried the handle. It stuck. He put a shoulder to it. It opened with a sound like a breath being released after too long. The room had been a pantry once. Shelves sagged under the weight of jar rings and dust. A square of old wallpaper showed a faded pattern of fish. In the far corner, a narrow stair climbed into darkness. The flashlight showed the steps leading to a small door cut into the wall under the eaves. He looked for footprints in the dust, because that's what sensible people do. He saw none but his own. He closed the pantry door. The house groaned like a sleeper turning over, and went still. He sat at the table and started to eat, then realized he was listening, half turned toward where the sound might come from. He was angry at himself for it. He cleaned the plate like a man scrubbing his own thoughts. At sunset, the fog thickened again. The light took on a different tone, more white than yellow, as if it were shining through milk. He checked the timing. Perfect. He wrote the numbers down with more force than he meant to. The radio sat waiting. The clock said 7:46 p.m. The logbook said 7:43. He set his watch by the radio clock, then by the kitchen clock, then by his phone. They didn't agree. None of them did. Each was only off by a minute or two, but no two matched. He told himself the generator's power jitter and the damp weather could do that. He told himself a lot of things. At 8:12, static on the radio rose like someone exhaling close to the mic. "Graywater," the male voice said, steady now, without the long hallway echo. "You missed the mark again." "What mark?" Cal said before he could stop himself. "The line." Cal's mouth went dry. He didn't ask which line. He stepped onto the balcony and looked at the tide gauge. The float rested just under 2 meters above chart datum. Wind east-northeast at 16 knots. Waves small, wind-whipped. "There is no line," he said into the mic. Because that's what men say to facts that bother them. "Identify your vessel." The radio clicked like someone tapping the shell of an egg. Then the same voice, softer. "There's always a line. You just can't see it until you've crossed." The transmission ended with a tone Cal didn't recognize, a descending chime like a child's piano key dropped down a well. He wrote it all down, like writing could make it straight. He told himself sailors got drunk and played games on the channel. He told himself maybe he did too, once. When he lay in bed that night, the steps on the back stair started again. 5. Pause. 3. But they were not on the wood anymore. They were in the walls, like a sound pressed between clapboard and plaster. He put a pillow over his head and listened anyway. On day 5, the fog didn't lift. The world was a sphere the size of a small town square, and the house sat in the center, patient as a stone. Cal logged wind, pressure, cloud, concrete words with numbers that felt like guardrails. He wound the beacon. He checked the fuel. He drank coffee that tasted like pennies. He tried the pantry stairs at noon because it felt worse not to. The steps were narrow enough that his boots hung over and his shoulder brushed the wall. He climbed to the door under the eaves. The latch was a hook on a loop. He unfastened it. The door stuck, then opened 2 inches with a soft tearing sound, like paint giving up a secret. Behind it was a crawl space under the roof. Dust moved in pale beams from a vent hole. He pushed the door wider and angled the flashlight. There was nothing there, but the shape roofs make when they try to keep rain out. He put the light down and listened. He heard a clock ticking. He looked back into the room below. The radio clock and the kitchen clock both ticked, yes, but this sound wasn't from below. It was near his face, close enough to tick the inside of his head. He bent further into the crawl space and saw it. A small wooden box, the size of a book, tucked near a joist. He slid it toward him. The lid lifted. Inside lay a metronome, old wood and brass, the weight set just so. It swung without any wind to move it. Tick, tick, tick. He stopped it. The silence after felt like he had knocked the breath out of the house. He placed the metronome back and closed the door. That night, he dreamed of a buoy bell that rang without a bell and woke to the radio making a sound like water boiling. He sat at the desk and listened. Static rose and fell, and within it, voices, plural, like a conversation too far away to join. A woman's voice, a child's, the man's. He couldn't make words, only tone. Urgent, patient, tired, a little amused. He pressed the transmit key and said, "This is Graywater." He didn't know why he said it like a name. The man's voice cut through as if pushed forward. "Meter says you're out," he said. "Back half an inch." Cal looked at the tide gauge. The float was 2 fingers higher than it had been an hour ago. The water crept, relentless and clever. "Who are you?" Cal said. But the radio only clicked again and went to C-hum. He didn't write this one down. He didn't want it to be the kind of thing that looked back at him later from ink. On day 6, the fog brightened from gray to white, and the world grew another 10 yards outward. Cal walked the perimeter until his calves hurt. He wanted to feel the edges of the place with his feet. He kicked the dead pier pilings like a child kicking fences. He found a patch of old rope half buried in peat and pulled until the knots came up like bones. He found a nail driven into a rock in a place where no carpenter would bother. An iron marker as old as the house, rust shaped into memory. He followed a line of such nails, one, then another, then a third, set just at the edge where stone gave way to marsh. He crouched by the third nail. Something under the mud shone faintly when the light caught it. Glass, and then didn't show itself again. When he came back to the house, he found the pantry door open. He was certain he hadn't left it that way. He stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the thin, dark mouth of the stairs until that felt foolish and went to close it. The metronome ticked in his head, though he hadn't touched it in a day. He shut the pantry door and put the broom across the handle, not as a barrier exactly, but as a witness. If it moved, he wanted to know. He ate standing. He drank water that tasted like the metal of an old key. He looked at the human parts of the room, chair, cup, coat, and was grateful for their stupidity. At dusk, the radio spoke again. "Graywater, Graywater," the man said, calm. "You're not lined." A sharpness rose in Cal. "Then come teach me." A small pause, then a not quite laugh. "That's not how this works," the man said. "You can't fix after. After fixes you." "What's after?" Cal asked. "Static. Then. You know when you wake and think you forgot to blow out a candle? And you go look, and there's no candle. And your heart still runs like there was a candle?" "Yes," Cal said, heat in his face. "That's after," the man said gently. The channel hummed like a sleeping animal. Cal pushed the mic away. He opened the logbook, then closed it. He went to the balcony and looked for the nails in the marsh line and could not see them. The fog had laid itself down flat and even. The light cut it into slices. The house breathed in his bones. At 2:14 a.m., he woke to the scrape of wood on wood, a soft, long sound like a drawer being opened slowly to keep quiet. He sat up. The scrape came again, longer than a small tap as something met a stop. He stepped into the hall. The broom lay on the floor, 2 feet from the pantry door. The door stood wide. Cold air flowed up from the stair, like something exhaled after a long hold. He stood very still. He listened. The air sounded like pages turning somewhere in a room far away. He clicked on the flashlight and put his hand on the rail. He went down the narrow steps, counting them like a charm. 8, 9, 10. His boot whispered over dust that seemed too smooth. At the door under the eaves, he paused. He expected the metronome. He did not expect the faint scent of soap, old, clean, a memory of someone washing hands after work. He opened the door. The crawl space held the small wooden box closed. The air around it felt slightly warmer than the air in the hall. He lifted the lid and saw the metronome still. He did not touch it. He looked to the right. In the dust near the joist, footprints had formed in a line, heel to toe. The size of his own, though he had not made them. They walked from the metronome to the vent hole and stopped at the wood, like a person had kept going into the night. He backed down the steps, not taking his eyes off the opening, until he crushed his heel on the bottom stair and nearly fell. He closed the pantry door and put the broom back. He went to the radio desk, set the chair against the door, then moved the table too, because human furniture is the oldest magic. He sat with his back to the desk and watched the pantry door until gray light seeped into the room and drew edges around things again. He did not sleep. When morning came, he moved the chair and the table and opened the door. The pantry smelled like cold dust. The stair stood bare. The metronome did not tick. The footprints were gone. He made himself right. Night movement. Pantry door opened. Possible animal incursion? No scat, no hair. Odor, soap. He underlined soap because it made him angrier than the rest. By morning, the fog had thinned to a gray film over the water. The world looked almost ordinary again. Cal boiled coffee until the smell of burnt grounds filled the room. He tried the radio check, static only. He told himself he would last the full 2 weeks. That was the job. A man could outwait strange sounds and his own nerves. At noon, he walked the shoreline. The tide was low, the mud streaked with lines of broken shells and bits of rope. He followed the row of iron nails again. There were more of them than before, he was sure. They glinted dull red where the salt had bitten through the rust. The third nail was gone. He found it half buried in the wet sand a few feet farther out, as if the earth had decided to move its boundary. When he bent to pick it up, he saw something else, a dark shape under the water, long and still, like the edge of a current that didn't belong. He stepped back. The water seemed to breathe in. The shape vanished. When he returned to the house, he found a bottle on the step, a glass one, old, corked tight. Inside, folded paper browned with age. He took it to the desk and eased it open. The paper was a hand-drawn chart of the bay. The house, the nails, the line he had seen in the water, all marked. At the bottom, a note in narrow script. When the light is late, the line moves. Keep your feet on the nails. He sat back, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. The radio clicked. Good, the voice said. You found it. Cal froze. What is it? The line. He turned toward the window. The fog shifted, and for a breath, the darker band in the bay was there again. A seam in the world, almost straight, moving as if it chose where to go. I see it, he whispered. Then don't cross, the voice said. Once you do, you're on the other side. The signal died with a slow fall of static. He sat in the quiet for a long time, the sound of the metronome ticking again above him, though he hadn't touched it. Each tick was faster than the one before. That night, the wind came from the east. The fog pressed against the glass, and every reflection looked slightly wrong, as if the light took just a fraction of a second longer to come back to him. At 2 minutes past 3, the house gave a single heavy groan. He was on his feet before he knew why. The pantry door stood open, the broom on the floor. Cold air spilled from the stairwell, smelling of salt and old wood. He went up, each step sounding softer than the last. The crawl space door hung ajar. The metronome was gone. In the dust, new footprints. His again, but walking toward the vent. He followed them to the end. They didn't stop this time. The dust simply ended where the wood met the wall. He turned to leave and heard faintly a bell buoy. Once, twice, far out. He didn't remember running down the stairs. Only the sound of his boots striking wood, the slam of the door, the cold air outside biting his face. The fog had broken open to moonlight. The tide had come in higher than he had ever seen, licking the edge of the lane. The iron nails shone like eyes under a thin skin of water. The line in the bay was closer now. He could see it, a wrinkle, a darker fold where the sea didn't behave like water. It curved toward the house, slow and certain. The radio crackled. You're out, the man said. Cal lifted the mic with shaking fingers. Tell me how to fix it. Silence. Then, keep the light steady. He ran to the beacon tower, threw the switch. The generator coughed and caught. The lens began its turn. The beam swept the fog and hit the line full on. The water shuddered, but the shape kept coming. He shouted into the radio. It's not stopping. The light's late, the voice said, almost kindly. You already crossed. The radio clicked off. He watched the line touch the base of the rocks. The tide gauge bent under the strain of water. It seemed thicker than water should be. The world tilted, then steadied. He couldn't tell if the fog moved or if everything else did. Then, just as suddenly, the light went out. He tried the switches. The generator hummed. The bulb was intact. The lamp simply refused to shine. In the silence that followed, he heard the metronome ticking again, slow, patient, in time with his heart. When the ferry horn sounded 2 days later, the harbor master waited on the pier. The boat came in empty. No duffel, no man. Just the keys to the house in a shallow pool of rainwater near the rail. They sent another keeper a week later. The new man lasted 1 night. He said the light worked fine, but the radio spoke in his own voice, half a second late. The harbor master didn't argue. Some places keep their own weather. The map from the bottle hangs on the notice board now, the paper warped from damp. The same message reads along the bottom in faded ink. When the light is late, the line moves. Keep your feet on the nails. 2 names are written beneath it. 1 is crossed out. If you ever take the ferry across Graywater Bay and see a single light turning through the fog, don't wave. Don't answer if it calls your name. And if you hear a buoy bell in a place where there shouldn't be one, keep walking, because the light on Graywater Shore never goes out. It just takes turns deciding who keeps it.